Let me in, I need to see the boss.
No one gets in to see the boss. The boss is busy, okay?
Oh yeah? Well, I think you need to hear what I have to say.
And why is that?
Narrator, I'd like to roll intimidation.
I'll allow it.
Ha! Nat 20! Now you have to let me in.
You rolled a nat 20. Please go see the boss. I am sufficiently cowed. The hardest thing for tabletop role-playing games to get right? Social encounters. And Cypher system is no exception. I have been critical of it in the past, but I've also been vague about what exactly I dislike. So now, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty and show you how Cypher gamifies social encounters and those social dynamics, and why it just isn't enough for someone like me. Now you might say, Corey, come on. Cypher isn't about that. It's about exploration and combat, so why do we even need social rules if that's not the focus of the game? Cypher has positioned itself as an everything game, a system you can put into any setting, any genre, and many of those have political intrigue, romance, wheeling and dealing. It's not about what you know, but who you know. And if it wants to tackle these subjects honestly, it needs to take a look at its failings and evolve. But what are social rules? You might be surprised. It's not just fast talking and seduction. And those are part of it. But if that's all you think about, you might be leaving a lot out of your role-playing game. Social rules can mostly be split into 3 categories in my opinion. First is the stuff PCs do to NPCs, or things that affect NPCs. Manipulation here is the most obvious, and while this word may have a negative connotation, I'm using it here as a fairly neutral term. Sure, you can fast talk the merchant into giving you 20% off, or intimidate the goblins into running away, but you can also give hope to a person willing to jump off a bridge, or convince someone to stand up for themselves. In any case, one person is trying to get another person to do something, either through persuasion, intimidation, or seduction. And in this case, it's usually always a PC against an NPC. A smaller part of manipulation is awareness, but this is different in some key aspects. Social awareness is understanding both the person a character is interacting with and the setting in which they inhabit. A great example of an awareness mechanic is the sense motive skill in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, which is usually used as a lie detector. Other great awareness rules could be about understanding what people want, need, or what they expect. Awareness can be used to manipulate using information you obtain as leverage to get something from your target. Another great category of social rules would be those dealing with connections. These are cultural social rules all about a person's place in the world. A son will listen to their mother, just as a student will listen to their teacher and a citizen to their president. We all belong to different groups, whether you're a Harvard alum, an Italian national, or a member of the Dead Unicorn. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Here, a person has an expectation that guides them, and in return, that person gets a certain amount of power and responsibility. But if they don't live up to those expectations, there can be consequences. So mind yourself, make sure you have a good etiquette skill. The last group is going to be about things that can affect the PC in a social way. You know that an NPC in a lot of games just could affect a player just like a player affects them, changing their mind or checking to see if they're lying. But it's usually seen as poor sport for a narrator to just make a persuasion roll against the PCs to make them all surrender.
Get off your horse. Kneel.
Instead, the NPCs usually have a slew of emotional effects to manipulate your character. Fear effects are the most widely used example of this. And this isn't reserved for just NPCs. A certain area or environment could make a PC feel a certain way, like a creepy graveyard or a relaxing bathhouse. Also, characters might make themselves have an emotional reaction. For example, they could take a flaw that makes them afraid of spiders or hate laundry day. At the end of the day, being social is really all about your emotions. They guide our reactions, who we like, who we dislike. A demon might make you run away in terror, but you also might turn down a dish just because it has a few peas in it. Both are important to the narrative. What happens when your characters push past their breaking point, and what do they do in response? But on the flip side, what if they're pampered? What happens when they get the love and support they need from others? How does this affect the character? How does this affect the story? Now let's see how Cipher tackles these issues. Mostly, it's just this one paragraph right here. Interacting with creatures. Basically, it says to make an intellect roll, modified by any skills a character might have, like being trained in pleasant social interactions. Or if the creature has like an opposing motive, that could give a hindrance. Also, characters must be able to communicate with the character by checking on the NPC's interactions. Once that's all taken care of, player makes the roll. After the roll succeeds or fails, the narrator delivers the result. That's it. There's no dispositions or changing of emotions. There's no figuring out what a person wants and trying to accommodate that. If you make a roll and you succeed, you get what you want. It's all about either manipulation or awareness. And if you think a person is lying, you can just make a roll and find out. You want someone to give you their gun? Just be more persuasive than the next guy. If you look at these rules in a slightly different light, this is no different from mind control features. I used to call it diplomancy, because it works just like a spell would. You make a roll and you just jump to the end with a result. You could argue that a narrator is supposed to make rules, calls, and judgments about what information a roll could give or how accommodating an NPC might be, but at the end of the day, Cipher puts a lot of work into how much damage an attack does and how a character might move around an area, but almost none into convincing an NPC to join in your crusade. And let me stress this. For social rules, this is it. There are no rules covering how creatures affect the PCs or what societal factors might do. Well, that's not entirely true. The book does have some rules, but they're all optional, and most are setting specific. And then there are the white books, the setting books, and there's a few optional rules that are social in there too. Our first contender is gaining insight. A PC can spend 3 intellect points. You can't reduce this with edge, you gotta spend the 3. And then the narrator can give the player a special bit of knowledge. The example in the book says that the narrator can tell the PCs that they know a guard who likes to drink, and giving him a bottle of booze will ensure that the guard will be drunk by the time the mission starts. While this rule is used mostly for investigations, you can see how it can be used for social situations. Understanding what kind of gift someone would like, well, that's a great advantage in gaining their trust. Gaining insight can be added to any game setting, but the next few examples are for specific settings. But I think you should be able to add as many of them to other genres just to add some complexity to your social situations. You might find this surprising, but the bulk of these rules are going to come from the horror genre. But it makes a certain amount of sense. Horror has always been about the tension between calm and fear. And while sitting at a table talking about horror may keep the player's emotions in check, a character in the middle of it all will have their emotions tied in knots. Shock is Cypher's stab at this type of roleplay. When something is shocking, it can be terrifying, disgusting, mind-bending. And the player has to make an intellect roll against the horror's level. If they fail, that character loses a round to their shock. Alternatively, they could also take intellect damage, as the horrible things affects their mental well-being. You can even give this effect to creatures, and now they have a fear rating built right in. Now, there have been a few games that uses a stress meter to simulate things like anxiety, fear, or just the wear of life. Using intellect points in this way seems like a no-brainer to me. When a character's stress hits a certain breaking point, a character must let their tension out in some way. With Shock and Cipher, that release of tension becomes madness. If a PC loses enough intellect from shock that they hit 0, they'll gain the mad descriptor. Here, the game is trying to simulate madness rules from other popular games like Ravenloft and Call of Cthulhu. Now, if the PCs can lose their mind from the stress of horror, it makes sense that the players can find relief somehow as well. Hysteria, this isn't in the main book, but it's rather from the Stay Alive genre book aimed to help narrators create horror-themed games. In this book, there's some great social rules, and it's all about how the genre affects the PCs. This includes hysteria. Basically, the character acts out for one round, screaming their head off, or maybe breaking something, having a panic attack. Just letting out all of their emotions, raw. This allows them to make a recovery roll, gaining back some precious endurance. But the chaos of it allows the narrator to make a GM intrusion, without giving XP to the players. I do like both shock and hysteria. I think they're solid rules, and they can be toned down just a little bit to include just regular social stresses and the general anxiety people might feel. And that could make them great rules for almost any genre that deals with social pressures, like, for example, politics or romance. Poor choices is another great optional rule from this book. And this is where a GM intrusion can now affect a PC's mental state and actions directly. Usually, a GM intrusion adds environmental factors, like a trap activating, fog rolling, and extra creatures here and there. But here, it can make a character act inappropriately. For example, an intrusion could make a character want to wander off on their own, or pick up that weird hitchhiker, or have sex in the cabin's shower. Of course, the players may reject these like any other intrusion by spending an experience point. On one hand, this is a great way to have characters interact with each other in new and novel ways, but it does run the risk of players being resentful of their narrator for attempting to make their character do things they think their character would never do. Taking away agency many feel that makes RPGs so fun in the first place. One final thing from Stay Alive, unease, where the characters just feel a sense of dread from some place or someone. When in the presence of something that gives unease, all actions are hindered. I really don't like this rule, because there's no way to defend against it, and just being hindered on everything. I mean, does that give you a sense of horror, or is that more just an annoyance? I probably would never use unease, because I think this book has a ton of great horror-inducing rules that do a much better job of giving off creepiness. But we gotta move on. We got the romance genre. And you'd think there'd be some great social rules in here, right? Well, let's take a look. Infatuation is a rule meant to give a little bit of embarrassment to a character. Around the person a character is infatuated with, they'll have to make an intellect check. The narrator makes a difficulty for this. If they fail, the character must do something embarrassing, or the narrator takes control of that character to make them do something embarrassing. Again, you run the risk here of a resentful player, just like in Poor Choices. But unlike Poor Choices, which could result in real danger, I'm unsure of what the repercussions of embarrassment is. Does your crush like you less? Do the people around you like you less? I guess since there isn't a mechanic behind it, that's why, unlike Poor Choices, you don't have to spend XP to avoid it. If I were to implement the infatuation rule, I would probably tie it to this next optional rule from the romance genre, relationship levels. Here's our big first social rule about connections. A character can have a connection with any other character, either romantically or platonically, at a level from 1 to 10. And that's it. That's the whole rule. Other than that the person is now trusting you, there are no real rules governing how this helps a character. At no level does it say, this character now trusts you enough you can borrow gas money from them. Or, now they love you enough that you'll have a joint bank account with them. Every level just has this certain amount of vagueness to it. I think this rule has potential, but you'll actually have to hammer out all the details yourself as a narrator. The last rule I'd like to cover comes from It's Only Magic. This is the genre book for modern magical settings. And the one rule they present for social situations is a pretty good one. It's called covens. Covens are a magical society that focuses on a specific type of magic or a magical aesthetic. In the example they give, they talk about a magical baking society that influences people through baked goods. Yeah, you just can't help but smile when you think of that. Here, they have rules for joining the society, the etiquette of the coven, and the consequences of breaking from that coven. The coven also affords special magical powers as you climb the ranks. Basically, it's like relationship levels, but there are real stakes and motivations here. This rule is wonderful. No notes. Now, do this with every genre. In your high fantasy, you can have guilds. In sci-fi, you can have your fleet ranks. In cyberpunk, you can be part of like a biker gang, right? The sky's the limit here, guys. This rule. That's about it. If you know a rule I should take a look at, please post it in the comments. I hope you can see now why I don't think Cypher has good rule systems for social encounters or political intrigue games. While there are a few rules I like, most of them are half-baked, if they're there at all. That's not to say that Cypher can't have great social rules. There's plenty of space for them in this game. They just need to be created. You know, that means I'll have to make a part 2 where I explain how to make great social rules for Cypher. Or on the flip side, if this video doesn't do well at all, well, just figure no one cares. We'll forget this ever happened. So do your duty by giving this video a thumbs up or down and leaving a comment, even if it's just to say, hey, great job. I'm a small YouTuber, so I have time to read all of my comments. Oh, and if you have your own social rules you use in Cypher, please post them. If I like them, I'll add them to the next video and I'll credit you. We might also have the same idea, and I'll let you know if we're thinking on the same lines too. You know, great minds do think alike a lot. I have a Patreon where you can buy me coffee, or rent, far more important. I also have some RPG documents on the Patreon, so go check them out. There's even one on the Cypher system. Thank you for watching, and in the meantime, go roll some dice.